so much for that warm intro, Mafe. And I am really so thrilled to be here. As Mafe shared, I volunteer with Creative Mornings in Oakland, and with Women Talk Design do this work where I support folks in public speaking. And so to bring those two worlds together is always really exciting. I actually first got introduced with Creative Mornings, and I was in Austin and first moved there. And the host, Ben Toma, took me to my very first queso, which for those of you who are from Texas or have been to Texas know that that's a big deal. And Creative Mornings was always the event that I would attend. I threw a lot of events on my own, but never really went to other people's events. And Creative Mornings was the only one I ever did, and just loved it so much that when I moved to Oakland, wanted to be a part of it, and try to attend San Francisco's whenever I can. So I'm really thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me. I've set up some captioning through Otter. It's automatic captions. So if any of you would benefit from that, I recommend you use that link to follow along with captions. It's not perfect, it's automated, but you can feel free to use that link and check it out. I'll also follow up with the slides and a bunch of resources at the end. So Mafe did a great introduction to Women Talk Design. Our overall mission is that we want to see a more diverse group of speakers on stage. We do a bunch of different programming, and if you haven't been to one of our online events, I hope to see you there. And I wanted to give a special shout out to this new series that we're running called Women Talk Design Speaker Stories. We have so many incredible women and non-binary speakers in our community. And so now once a week, we're going to be chatting with one of the speakers for an hour. It'll be me asking them questions to start off with about what topics they're speaking about, what is it that they do to prepare when they're getting ready to speak, advice that they have. And then we're going to open it up for Q&A and have breakout sessions so you can meet other people in the community, share what you've learned, share where you are. These are some of our upcoming speakers, and we're running this weekly. And so I really recommend that you join in and check it out. All right, so to get started today, I know our theme this month is stress, and public speaking can be pretty stressful, especially speaking virtually. And so this is going to be an interactive workshop. I'm going to ask you to participate in the chat, to take notes on your own. And so for this first one, I want you to annotate, which I know for those of you who've been to Creative Mornings events know that we love the annotation tool. If you haven't, just a quick how to use this, the top part of your Zoom, either under More or under View Options, you'll find the ability to annotate. So if you want to open that up, and if any of you want to practice right now, if you want to create some stamps, draw something, write, I would love to see if you can test that out, because I'm going to ask you to annotate to answer the question in just a second. Great. All right, love it. Lots of good annotations. Okay, I'm gonna have you pause for a second. I'm gonna clear it, and then I'm going to give you specific instructions of what to annotate. All right, let me clear this here. Okay, so I have a list. Oops, I'm still on the annotations. Okay, I have a list right here of some things that I've heard that can stress you out when it comes to public speaking virtually. So maybe your audience tunes out, maybe your presentation isn't that interesting, you say or like too much, you forget what you're gonna say, technology doesn't work. I want you to put a underline or a stamp or a star next to which one of these most stresses you out. And if there's something that's maybe not on here, feel free to use the type tool and you can type it out as well. And for Lynn, yes, you do have Annotate on mobile. You should. It's a little like pencil in a blue circle in the corner of your screen, bottom left, I think. It might depend on the device. All right, a little bit of everything in here, it seems. Audience maybe isn't paying attention, speaking too fast, very guilty over here. We'll talk about that. I often speak too fast. Forget what you're gonna say, blank out. Yeah, that's real, especially as you get nervous and you're stressed. It's like this reinforcing cycle of then you forget what you're gonna say, which stresses you out even more. Lots of stressors. All right, so public speaking virtually is clearly very, very stressful. And I will tell you that fears when it comes to public speaking don't always go away. I work with speakers who speak to thousands of people, give hundreds of talks, and still get nervous right beforehand. And so my goal with all of our workshops is not necessarily to say, I'm gonna make all your fears go away, but hopefully you do feel a bit less stressed knowing how to prepare and how to handle those things as they come up. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and clear this, and then we will move on. All right. So this is what we're gonna cover today. Oops, this is the thing with your annotation tool. You have to make sure to X out of it, otherwise you'll keep annotating instead of going through your slides. Let me clear that. Dry mouth is real. Have some water with you all the time. All right, so this is our agenda. I'm going to introduce you to a framework that you can use for crafting presentations. And this is called Public Speaking for Creatives. It is a design framework that was created by Women Talk Design's founder, Christina Woodkey. And so she uses it to design all types of things. We're gonna talk about how to use it to design presentations. I'm gonna talk a little bit about how to prepare for virtual presentations, how to calm your nerves, and then ultimately how you can project confidence on screen. As I mentioned, I'm gonna have times where I want you to answer questions either in the chat or on your own. I really want this to be interactive for you. And I'll also save some time at the end for questions. Quick PSA is that I truly believe when it comes to public speaking that there is no quote unquote one right way. And I think oftentimes we think, oh, I need to, be this really, exciting, loud, TED-like speaker. And I've seen really incredible speakers that have all different types of presence of how they show up. And when it comes to virtual public speaking, I've also seen some different really interesting formats. So too, I wanted to highlight Kat Velos is an incredible designer and community builder and speaker. She's actually going to be one of our speaker stories coming up in a couple weeks. She did a gathering called Zoom Out, where she had people get together for a screen-free social gathering. And so thinking about how can I, use what I have, but do something different, not necessarily being live on screen all day. Maybe you can present without screens. What would that look like? And then another one here is Jessie Shar. She made a pre-recorded talk for Tito, is a ticketing platform, and they do a conference called Admission, I believe. And her talk was on F to hell yeah in 2 weeks, basically what happened when she went from figuring out that they weren't going to be able to have an in-person event this year and how she dealt with it. And one of the things I think she did really amazingly is decided, okay, I'm going to pre-record this. And so I have some flexibility to do this over time. She changed costumes. She did a bit of acting in this. You can see here, she's laying on her couch, kind of drinking, passed out, upset, and then comes in and kind of has different cuts and screens. So there's different ways that you can break the mold when it comes to virtual presenting. So I want you to take a minute and answer in the chat. Think back to the last time that you had to put together a presentation. It could be either virtual or in person if you haven't given any virtually yet. And what was the first thing that you did to prepare? Take a second to answer that in the chat. Write out a script, make an outline, agenda, research, write notes, get some coffee, I like that, mood board, identify goals. Great, set up teleprompter, outlining talking points, ask myself if I understand what I really want to say, that's great. Awesome, so a lot of talking points, maybe some rehearsing, speaking to yourself in the mirror. So there might be different ways that you approach this. Oftentimes I hear, and I haven't seen this yet, but I've seen similar themes of, I'm gonna open kind of Keynote or open Google Slides or open PowerPoint and start making my presentation. And I hope with the introduction to this framework that some of you might be doing this already, you might think differently about how you'll first start. And so the design framework that I wanted to introduce to you, for those of you who don't know it, is called CAMP. And I'll send out a link to Christina Woodkey's article, who had come up with CAMP afterwards. But she calls it a theory for designing just about anything. And so we're going to use it to think about how we're going to design presentations. So this is what CAMP stands for. It stands for context, architecture, mechanics, and then poetics. We're not going to spend time going into each of these today. That's what we do in a lot of our longer workshops, but I do want to talk a bit more about context. But first I'll tell you what each of these mean. So when it comes to context, what is it that you want to know before you even get started? And I saw some people talked about thinking about like, really, what is the goal of my presentation, or who's my audience, which is great. Those are the types of things that you want to think about even before you create an outline or a script, or start practicing in front of the mirror. So really important to first understand what is the context of my presentation. And that's when a lot starts to change when it comes to presenting online, which is what we're going to focus on. Next is your architecture. So what is the shape of your presentation going to look like? Is it going to be shaped by storytelling? Is it going to be something that has builds upon each other as you teach? So what is the shape of this going to look like? Ultimately, mechanics are what are the techniques and devices that you're going to use to really help convey what you want to and create the experience that you want. So mechanics can be narrative mechanics that you use in your presentation. You might describe the setting or have a dialogue or use foreshadowing in your presentation. It might also be your visuals. So the mechanics your visuals are helping support what it is that you want to say and ultimately helping create that experience for your audience. And I heard a designer once say, in presenting, you are your UI. So like you are your user interface, and you're a mechanic as well. So the way in which you show up as a presenter, your tone of voice, your facial expressions, your hands and motions, those are all mechanics as well. And then ultimately you're building up towards these poetics. So the poetics are, what is the experience that you're hoping to create for your audience? Do you want them to be inspired? Do you want them to be angry? Do you want them to feel empowered? What is it that you want them to feel during your presentation? And what do you want them to do as a result of that? So poetics is something that comes at the end because you're building towards it, but I also think it's important to think about it in your context so you can ultimately design to it. So this is all I'm going to say right now about full camp, but instead we're going to focus on the C part of camp, the context. So when it comes to context, you can think about the 5 whys: who, what, when, where, and why. And I highlighted the why part at the end because even though this comes last normally when you say the 5 whys, I think it's a really important place to start. And a couple of you mentioned this with, how you start thinking about presentations is, why are you giving this presentation? What is it that you want your audience to get out of it? What's your purpose? Are you going into this meeting to get consensus among stakeholders? Are you trying to pitch an idea and convince people to, buy your product? Are you coming into brainstorm and really trying to get everyone's ideas and input so you can move forward with that? Starting with that why is going to be really important because it might also affect then who you bring in the room and what it is that you're doing. So this here is my quick definitions for these who, what, when, where, why. So again, who is going to be in the audience? What is this talk or presentation or even meeting? If you're facilitating meetings, you can think about this. What is it about? What is the format? When you are delivering the presentation, what are some of the whens that you need to know about? So it might be time of day, might be important. It might be important when you're delivering this when it comes to other things that are happening. So maybe you're the third person who's presenting, or you're presenting during a week-long presentation and you're on day 2. Because thinking about what people experienced before they got to you might be important. And also, what else is happening in the world? I think that especially right now, especially presenting online, is an important thing to think about. Where are you delivering this presentation in the platform, and understanding some of the platform constraints. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then ultimately, again, your why. And so my question for all of you is thinking about these different elements of the context: who, what, when, where, why. And I mentioned this already. What is different about presenting online? What changes when you're maybe presenting for an in-person presentation versus presenting online? And I'd love for you to answer this in the chat. You can't read the energy, the rapport with the audience. It's a big thing, not being able to see people all the time. I appreciate those of you who have your cameras on. Technology. The audience might be bigger. They're real close. I'm not sure what that means. I guess like people are in different environments. They're not kind of wearing their work costuming. You see yourself. That is definitely a weird one. In Zoom and some other platforms, you can actually hide yourself when you're presenting, so you don't have to see yourself. Attention span is different, distractions. yeah, how it ends, people might just hang up really quickly. So a lot changes. And when you think about your kind of who, what, when, where, why, I think two of the biggest things that change are maybe the what is the format that this is happening, kind of the format in which you see your audience, and the where are you delivering this presentation? Where is everyone else when they're consuming this? But there also might be some changes in the audience. Maybe you have more people joining in, as someone mentioned. What else is happening? The format might change. So a lot changes within this. And what I'd like to do is show you an example of how a context might change when something moves online and some of those considerations and how you can prepare for those. So I was first putting together this presentation. I was supposed to give a workshop at SF Design Week. And so this is me presenting in 2019 at San Francisco Design Week. It was a small workshop on public speaking essentials. It was in their hub. There was about 20, 25 people there. We were in person. People had Post-its. They can do these activities. I think it was like a 2.5 hour, 3-hour workshop. And I was going to give a similar one this year, maybe the same content because a lot of people couldn't attend since it was so small this first year. And we were planning this back in February, I believe. And then as we all know, nothing happened in person this past June. And so this is what the workshop ended up looking like. Quite different. The only way to see my participants was through this chat on the side. It was also the only way that they could interact with one another. This was on a platform, I think this was called, I don't actually remember the name of the platform. WebEx maybe? I don't know. If one of you know, feel free to put it in the chat. This is a new platform, so I'm actually used to presenting with Zoom, and there are some things that you can do with Zoom that I couldn't do with this platform. So I couldn't play music through the platform. I couldn't do Zoom breakout rooms to keep people interactive. There were 883 people who joined in from all around the world. So there were a lot of things that I had to think about that changed. And thank you, this was Crowdcast. So what I did is put together my who, what, when, where, why, and I looked at what did this look like, my context before when I was going to present in person, and what are some of the things that changed to think about how I wanted to create a new presentation for this presenting at this event. So I love Post-its. I use it for every part of my preparation. So you can see here, I know you can't read all this, but I'm gonna walk you through my who, what, when, where, why. On the left-hand side, it's for when this was gonna be in person, and then on the right was how that changed. So the audience for SF Design Week is creators, architects, designers, mostly folks from San Francisco, but sometimes people come to San Francisco, and they're really here to learn, to get inspired, to meet other people in their field. And then what changed about this is still maybe similar types of people who are attending, but this was now a global audience. And so I had to consider that, folks might be joining at all different times. Maybe they're in different countries and have different cultural backgrounds and all of that. But one of the big things was that there was something that was different on people's mind. I think when you think about your audience, it's important to think about what's important to them. What might they be thinking about and caring about and curious about? And at SF Design Week, this was pretty shortly after George Floyd was murdered. And what was on everyone's mind was not just the pandemic and dealing with the day-to-day of that, but as the opening keynote of SF Design Week called it, these two pandemics. There was the COVID pandemic and the racism pandemic. And that was something that you couldn't just ignore going into this event. The what changed also. So I went from presenting a 2 or 3 hour in-person workshop to I only had 1 hour, still wanted it to be a workshop and interactive. And I ended up actually changing what the topic was based on my why, which we'll talk about in a second. The when, I was thinking about, okay, I'm second as part of SF Design Week on the second day. So people would have experienced the opening keynote. I wanted to make sure to attend that so I can reference it because I knew most people would be there. Also something to keep in mind was that the world was changing every day. And so I wanted to make sure that I left time for myself to prepare just before the presentation in case I needed to change anything based on what was happening. Where, again, I mentioned some different constraints online and had to figure out, okay, well now how am I going to keep this interactive even though it's only going to be with chat is the only really way that I can do that. And then my why shifted too. Ultimately, I wanted to give this presentation at SF Design Week to inspire more folks in design to feel more confident presenting, because I think that it's so important. But this new kind of why, what that really resonated with me was that people we're going through a really tough time right now. And we're all going to be forced to present online in one way or another for work or for something that we were passionate about or something we were forced to do. And I really wanted to empower people with the skills that they could feel more confident doing this online. And so that shifted, and I'm not just going to talk about how to present in general, because there are some best practices that translate both for in-person and online, but I really want to focus on what are these tips that you can do when it comes to online, so that I can give those to folks so that they can, feel more empowered to present more confidently when they needed to. So those are some things, a lot, changed. It ultimately changed my entire presentation. And I want to go into some kind of tips that you can use when you're thinking about these different circumstances for online. So we talked a little bit about some of the challenges and things that are different that come up when it comes to presenting online. And one of the big things that changes in our who, what, when, where, why is the where. When you're presenting in person, everyone is here together. You're in a bit more of a controlled environment. You know that everyone is, has the same lighting that you do, is watching on the same technology, is experiencing your presentation. There still might be distractions with their phone or laptop, but the environment is a bit more controlled. And that's not the case when it comes to presenting virtually. In general right now, both because there's so much happening, but also because we're on our computers, our attention spans are shorter. There's a lot more distractions. And then you also have to consider how people are joining in, device and bandwidth considerations, because not everyone is experiencing your presentation in the same way. And so I want to share some tips for that. So one thing that's really important when it comes to short attention spans is how can we keep attention? And what is really helpful in this is thinking about how can you vary your content, your delivery, and your visuals. And so here I have just different types of slides that I'm using here to show some variation. And I'll talk about this in a second, normally in person, when I present, I oftentimes don't use slides unless I need to. I really like to write on whiteboards. Sometimes I'll show a lot with my body language and my hands. But when it comes to presenting online, I think it's very important for people to have visuals for a couple of reasons. And so I want to keep them varied. I want to have photos. I change from a maroon kind of intro slide to a teal one when I'm trying to tell people, now's your turn to apply this. So varying those up a bit. And we'll talk about delivery in just a bit. When it comes to the content, when I'm creating my presentations, I do it all on Post-its. I shared that Post-its I find are really helpful. And so each of these Post-its represent a different type of element that I might put in my presentation. So the green are activities. So this is when I'm prompting you to do something. The pink are, I call them insights or points that I want to make. So different kind of supporting points for my ultimate goal of my presentation. The orange Post-its are stories or examples. So those things that are, some type of anecdote or story or example, I'm going to have a part of it. This is really funny. The blue in here is a fact or research or data. I didn't have a lot of that in this presentation because the audience that I was speaking to, I didn't feel like I needed to convince them that this was important. Instead, I needed to offer them helpful tools. And so what I find is really helpful about this is that I can see, okay, if I had, all pink notes, that means I'm just going to be sharing these insights with people the whole time, but not actually giving them opportunities to engage with activities or supporting what I'm saying with data or research or offering stories. And so being able to have these Post-its and especially either having different colors or just making a mark with the letter in the corner will help you then see what type of variation that you can offer in your presentation. And then you can also use it when you're working on architecture to help ultimately shape your presentation, but we're not going to get into that today. All right, another way to keep attention is through activities. And I think this is one of the things that comes up a lot is I can't see my audience. I don't know if they're engaged. Is anyone listening? Are they checked out? And I think even in a presentation where it's more of a talk type of format, not like a workshop or something that you imagine hands-on, it's so important to still have engagement activities. I think you really don't want to talk for more than like 5 or 7 minutes without breaking things up a little bit. And so here are a couple of quick activities that you can do. You can have people think of an answer to a question, or write it down themselves, it's really important to give them time to do this. I think sometimes we'll say, well, think back to a time that X, Y, Z, and then you keep talking and they don't actually have time to do that. So if you're treating this like a true activity, you want to tell people, think about this time and take a moment and write it down. And time when it comes to presenting virtually is really warped. It's going to feel like a really long time to just be silent and give people time to do something. So I recommend you have your phone near you or a watch and a timer so that you can say, okay, I'm going to give people a minute to do this. So take a minute, I'm going to time you, I'll let you know when we're coming back. And then it'll help you too because your time's going to be all warped. You can have them answer in the chat. I love Zoom breakout rooms. So if you're a small enough group, you can invite people to Zoom breakout rooms and have them share with one another. So answer a question, come together, share. You can also have them annotate like we did. So you might have people answer a poll or, stamp near something that's important to them. And this is a good way both to keep people engaged. If you let them know ahead of time they're going to be expected to participate, then they can actually engage with what you're doing. It can also be a good way to, see if your audience is following along, to get answers to things too, to check for understanding. And so I definitely recommend, regardless of the length of your presentation, to try to have some type of activity as part of it. When it comes to distractions, there are so many different things that are going to distract people when they are listening to your presentation. And so my two pieces of advice here are to both show and tell and to use repetition. So I mentioned that I don't use slides as much when I'm presenting in person, and I feel like I have people's full attention. But when it comes to people joining in from wherever they are, I think it's really important to have something that's both visual and something that's auditory that they can listen to. Someone might be listening to my presentation while they're cooking or doing something else. And so if there's something on my slides, I want to make sure that I'm also talking about it in case they can't read my slides. But I also want to give them this visual because some people are more visual learners and or their internet might be breaking up and they can't actually hear what you're saying, but they can see it. And so I actually put more on my slides when I present online than I normally would. If you look at a lot of best practices for slides, it'll say, just use images and don't put too many words. And you still don't want to have like a full paragraph, but I do think it's really helpful to have some key words so that people can follow along, even if they just see your slides. This is also important when you think about accessibility. So I, provided captioning if you needed that. I think if you don't have captioning, thinking about, if someone is deaf or hard of hearing, how are they, going to be able to access your presentation? And then use repetition. Someone might miss what you say because, again, their internet cuts out or they get distracted. And so if something's really important, to repeat what you want to say. Repeat it over and over again. And this is great to use in any of your presentations, but especially online, I find repetition to be really important. All right, so then also when it comes to bandwidth or other internet limitations, my advice here is to keep it simple. Speak slowly, which I'm not always great at doing. This is what I'm working on, and provide alternatives. So sometimes I know people want to have like a lot of animations in their slides, but if someone has lower bandwidth, they might not be able to access it. Or if you're thinking about wanting to show a video, you might consider that folks might not be able to stream it through here. So can you provide a link for them to watch it on their own and say, take 2 minutes, watch this, and then come back and let's talk about it together. You might also, have the link that you want to send out to people to access your slides if they can't pull them up. So I actually, at the end of this, will send out a link that has my slides and a bunch of different resources. But, that could also be something that maybe I want to send out during for folks who might not be able to follow along with my slides. I know there are some questions. I'm going to keep going through this presentation and then I'll leave time for Q&A at the end. So I do want to ask, I want you to think back to your last presentation and what is something that you would have changed now that it could have been something you thought about already, or it could be something thinking about what I had just shared when it comes to presenting online and some of the things that we have in mind. You can write this down for yourself. You don't have to write it in the chat, but you can if you want to. Make it interactive. Great. Sleep. Sleep is important. We're going to talk in just a second about how to prepare yourself and knowing what you need so that you can really show up and be present when you're presenting. Meditate before. Great. Be on time. We're gonna talk about this too. Well, in just a second about kind of preparing and all the things that can go wrong and how to prepare for that. Think about accessibility. That's great. All right, so now I want to move into more about yourself as a presenter and how to prepare, how to calm your nerves, and how to project confidence while you're presenting. So my first piece of advice is to practice. Practice out loud. I think oftentimes we think, oh, well, I know what I'm going to say in my head, so it's fine. And when you go to say it out loud, it can sometimes like not come out. And you're like, wait, but I had it in my head. And practicing out loud is very different than practicing in your head. So practice out loud and then practice with other people. So to the extent that you can, especially since you're presenting virtually, if you can find someone to join in remotely and do a practice round with them, it'll really help you both figure out maybe any issues that might come up, but also help ease some of your nerves knowing that you've been through this. Set up your space. So I'm going to talk about some tips for setting up your environment because, as I mentioned, you are not in a controlled environment. You're creating both your own. And so what are some things that you should think about for your own space? Test. Things will go wrong regardless, but less will go wrong if you test in advance, or you'll know how to handle those things. So always test your tech, do a dry run whenever you can, and have a backup plan. So this is my setup. If I was to take a picture of what this looked like right now, this is a bit of my setup in my apartment. I do have a nice new table now, but this was our old IKEA table. So I stack my computer with a couple of, you can use books or games so that you're looking straight at me, right? A lot of the times I see people have nose, or like I'm looking down, and you really, to help your audience feel like you're present and they're engaged with you, being able to look at you straight on can be really great. So if you want to stand when you present, you might actually stack it even more. I'm sitting, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. I keep my notes on my main computer so that if I want to reference any notes, I'm still looking at the same screen as my camera. I also have all of you on the same screen as my camera so that I'm mostly staying focused here rather than at my other screen. My slides are here for you. They're not here for me. I have been looking at them a little bit because I still use them to reference to make sure I'm following along, but I created them for you, not for me, which is why I have those on a separate note. And yeah, I think those are the things that I wanted to mention about my setup. So couple of notes here. Think about your background. So you might, think about where might I set up my setup for presenting. So I'm actually at my kitchen table. I have a desk that's somewhere else, but behind me then you can see my entire apartment. And for me, I want to eliminate distractions of even you listening to me and seeing all the things behind me. And so I move over so that I have more of a plain background. I also really like to always have my Austin Design Week poster behind me because it's something that's really important to me. And so I switched out which pictures were here so that you can see my Austin Design Week. Lighting is important to think about. Some people, when we all moved online, got new lighting kind of setups, which you might want to think about. But you can also just find a space that has natural lighting. And when you can, having the lighting come at you or from the top is going to make sure that you're not backlit and people can see you. So one of the things here that I showed in my picture is that all my windows are facing out so that the light is coming on me. Oops. Computer placement I talked about, I stacked this up a little bit. Thinking about your sound. So something that I think works really great is just having the regular headphones that plug into your computer. I actually got my headphone jack stuck in my computer, so I can't use headphones right now. So what I do is make sure that I have all my windows closed. I'm very fortunate to not have pets or animals that might be running around that could cause a distraction. But I also bought, in case I did have that, a connector for USB to plug in my headphones so that I can plug that in if I need to. But you want to think about all the other sound that might get picked up. Also, testing is really important because you want to figure out, what does your sound sound like to other people? Sometimes we hear things in the background and we think they're so loud and we feel like we need to apologize to everyone, and they don't hear it. And so if you're practicing with someone, you might, open a window so that you have some background noise, or tell your partner to like run the blender or something and ask that person how loud it is, so you can figure out, is that something I actually need to address in my presentation or not? Distractions, thinking about what type of distractions might distract you. So we talked about audience distractions before and how to keep them engaged, but thinking about yourself. Do you have things that are going to pop up on your computer? Can you close those out? I always close Slack out of my computer, because not only does it distract me, but it makes a noise that you all can hear. And that's really distracting and annoying. But when I'm presenting, the Creative Mornings team, I might need to reach them if I have technical difficulties, and I have Slack on my phone. So I can still have access to that if I need it. So a couple of quick tips when it comes to thinking about your setup. Another thing that I want to talk about was testing. So it's really important, as I said, to just test kind of everything that you can. Something that I do when it comes to testing my slides and to see, will people be able to read what's on them, is beforehand, if I don't have anyone to test with directly, I will sign in as a guest on Zoom on my phone. And so then I can see, okay, this is what it's going to look like if someone is joining in on their phone, and this is how small it's going to be. I often also play music, and the music sounds a lot louder on your own computer, or sorry, it'll come out even louder on someone else's. So I have to lower the sound really low on my computer when I'm playing music, because it's going to come out really loud for other people. And I knew that because I turned on the music on my computer, joined in on my phone, went in another room, and was like, oh my goodness, this is way too loud. I need to lower that. So you can try to test on a different device, or again, with someone else. The other thing is, you want to have a backup plan. So this is something that I put together for when I was doing my SF Design Week talk. I thought, okay, well, what can go wrong? There might be choppy Wi-Fi, or my browser won't work. And so what am I going to do? I'm going to join on my phone. I had my slides ready in a link so that I could send it on Slack to the folks that were helping me out, and then they could put it in the chat. So that's, having a backup plan ready in case things might go wrong. And actually during this talk, I got kicked offline. So everything shut down in the middle of my talk. And luckily I was able to work with the people on my phone on Slack to figure out what was happening. And I rejoined. Everyone thought that I did it on purpose because I was talking about what might go wrong, but I didn't, but we were able to deal with it. All right, gonna share some quick tips for calming your nerves, and then we can move into Q&A. So really important, I think that it is great to figure out, how is it that you specifically react to stress or being nervous? Because ultimately we experience that in different ways, and the way that you might address that and prepare is going to be different. I recommend that you test out different techniques to see what works for you, and then ultimately create a routine so that you can do this over and over again, and each time you don't have to think, how am I going to deal with this? So this is me. You've seen my headshot. I wanted to share how I think about this. So I am someone who is very high energy. You can tell I talk really fast. I was a group exercise instructor, a cheerleader, a camp counselor. It's like, I get really excited when I'm in front of other people. And especially when I'm nervous, I get anxious jitters. And so what I need to do before a presentation is to calm myself down, which means no caffeine, although I do it all the time. I always cheat, but like ideally I don't have caffeine, because then I just go off the roof. If I can, I run. Running like really helps me get out a lot of my anxious energy. So if I'm able to do that in the morning, I will. I actually also run while I'm developing my presentations. If I'm getting stuck at all, it's really helpful for me. That's where I do my best thinking. And so I recommend, in figuring out how both to calm yourself down, you might also want to think, where do I do my best thinking? Is it in the shower? Is it taking a walk? Is it doing a different creative project? So that if you get stuck when you're preparing, you can do that. Deep breaths and power poses. So if any of you have not seen Amy Cuddy's TED Talk, I highly recommend it. I know there's some like questions about her science, whatever, it works to power pose. So have your hands up, hands on hips, deep breath, helps increase your confidence, but also helps me calm down and center myself. And then because I have so much extra energy, I actually like to sit. Some people don't like to sit when they're presenting because they feel like it drains their energy and you don't like feel as excited. I feel like I need this for like some extra, you know, kind of grounding. But if I feel tired and need more energy, I might raise my computer and stand. A couple of quick techniques that you can do to calm your nerves. So you can do different improv games. There's one that Denise Jacobs, who is one of our speakers, taught us, that you can look at different objects and name them funny things throughout the room. And it helps you both be present where you are and get yourself out of your mind. You can meditate. I'm actually going to have us do a quick exercise really quick. Whoever wants to participate, I encourage you to, but I want to show you what I mean by shake it out. This is an improv technique that Cheryl Platts taught me. So I'm going to invite you to stand up. You don't have to if you don't want to, but I recommend it. And this is something that you can do to both either shake out your nerves or to help give you energy if you need it. So I think it can actually do both of those. And so what you're going to do is you're going to shake an arm, another arm, a leg, and another leg. But you're going to do 4, 3, 2, 1. So we're all going to do this together. I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, then 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 1, 1, 1. Great. Thank you for everyone who indulged me in that. I think that can be a great little technique to just shake out either your nerves or just get yourself pumped up. You might also remind yourself of your why. Why are you doing this? I think that that is can be really helpful as you get nervous. All of these techniques are trying to get you out of your own head and to try to help center you. I hear that a lot. Every time I do the shake it out, people are always like, yep, she's a cheerleader. Another technique that you might use is, you know, having some pop-up music beforehand. So I had the song Express Yourself when we were getting started. I thought that was a fun, like, get us in the mood. So I would love for you to write down for yourself. You don't have to put this in the chat right now, but what is a technique that you want to try out the next time that you are going to present? Take a second to think about, okay, let me test out this one and see if it works for me. I'm going to not take my own advice. I'm going to keep talking as you're doing that just because we're running short on time. All right, final piece, exude confidence. As I mentioned, there's no one right way to present. I've seen a lot of really great presenters present very differently. I went to South by Southwest last year and Susan Fowler gave one of the keynotes and she read her entire speech. And she told us ahead of time, she made some joke about how she'll start telling Seinfeld jokes if she like doesn't have something ahead of her. And she prepared to be able to read and look up. And she told a really heartfelt story. And it was still an amazing talk, even though, you know, she wasn't this like walking all over stage and really energetic and had everything that she was going to say memorized. And so I do really think that there's different ways that you can present and still be effective. But I want to share a couple of quick tips when we think about folks that are showing confidence when they are presenting online. So one is eye contact, which is weird when it comes to presenting online because I look like I'm making eye contact with you when I'm looking at the video, but if I actually want to look at you, sorry, the camera, I can't do that. Body language, so do you have open body language? Speaking slowly. Oftentimes when we speak fast, not only do we lose people, but we can seem more nervous. And so speaking slowly is actually a great way to show confidence in what you're talking about. And pausing. When people ask my #1 advice for public speaking, it is to pause. I think people often don't pause enough. Pausing can do so many things. It's a really great mechanic as you're presenting to help give your audience a chance to just process what you're saying, to give them some time to take things in. It can act as an underline after I say, the power of pause is important. You're like, oh, that must be important. She's paused. It's also really good for yourself. It gives you an opportunity to reset. When I pause, I think, okay, well, I'm going really fast. Let me slow down. If I forget what I'm going to say, I can pause and take a moment and breathe. It's also a great way, I don't even remember what I was going to say. Pausing is great. It's important. So when it comes to this, I have a couple of reminders that I do for myself. I love all these decorations you put all over my slides. They're great. So this is a picture of my grandfather many years ago. He is a lot older now, but I put this right by my camera as a way to show I'm going to look at him. And so I'm still look like I'm looking at, I feel like I'm looking at someone, but I'm looking at the camera. And then I have my 2 reminders to slow and pause. And so I recommend choosing what is the one thing that I want to work on. I think it's hard to try to do everything at once, but maybe you say, I'm going to work on eye contact, or I'm going to work on speaking slowly. I'm going to work on pausing. What I was going to say when it comes to pausing is a lot of people are concerned about saying like or and one of the ways to start saying those less is to get more comfortable with pausing. Because ultimately it's our mind is going faster than we can speak, or we're speaking faster than our mind and we can't catch up. And so we're using filler words, but instead if you're using pauses, you can sound more confident and more thoughtful and give your mind time to catch up. All right, quick wrap up, and then we're gonna dive into questions. Start with camp, practice, set up your space, test, and have a backup plan. Find a routine that works for you. We are all different. There's different things that's gonna work for you. Eye contact, speaking slowly, and pausing will go a long way. So I am so excited to hear each of you speak and what you have to share in your voice. And thank you all for being here, and I'm excited to take some questions.